Hi, YouTube people, friends, family. Happy New Year. I hope you're all really, really hopeful. I hope that you've all found a positive space to to live into. It's been a really challenging year, and I think for a lot of us that suffer from narcissistic abuse, not for nothing, this particular election has brought out a lot of trauma and anxiety. I think it's true for a lot of people. Before I get started, I just want to put the question out there to any of the 4 people that may watch this. If anyone knows how to actually pause recording in Movie Maker, that's the application I'm using, and I haven't figured out any other way to actually pause recording. I have to stop and splice. So, with that said, I want to also welcome anybody. If you have just found this community, there are a lot of flavors out there. There's going to be experts, there's going to be people who resonate with you and some that don't, but I will tell you from the deepest place of gratitude and truth, this channel has saved my life in no uncertain terms. There is no other place in the world where you can get this kind of support, and it's at your fingertips, and it's free. And I want to also say that my making these videos, I struggle with getting myself to do it. We all know what it's like to be shamed and to be put down, and I struggle with that myself. I think, I don't really have much to say, and when I do say stuff, I just kind of ramble a lot, and I go off on tangents, and I feel like I don't stick to the subject, so I'm going to really try and do that. But this isn't about making money. I'm not monetized. I'm not looking for that. I'm not looking to feed my ego. What I will say is that the simple act of just putting your words, even on a video that maybe only one person sees, is so cathartic and healing that you really should just do it. You really need to be heard. You need to hear your own voice. You need to process all of those emotions and those traumas. And so I just encourage you. I encourage you to just keep plugging away and listening and sharing, and most of all, take responsibility for your life moving forward. We all have this skin crawling moment when people say, "Oh, you can't blame your family." You sure can. You sure can. But you can blame them for where you are, how you got there, and for the traumas that you have. But they're not here, and once you go no contact, you are the one responsible. You're the only one driving the train. So I am absolutely 100% taking responsibility for my life today, and it has been a very, very rough road. I'll touch on these last couple of years, which have been the hardest. And when I say this channel has saved my life, it has saved my life. Hold on. I don't want my cat to eat all the other cat's food. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is I want to interject into my timeline because there's a number of things that I want to talk about in these videos, but I had my trauma and it was horrible, and I'll talk about the early years a little bit later, but I went no contact with my family of origin in 2010 or 2011, 2010, yeah. And a little while after that, I was offered a job at a company that was in an industry that I had never worked in, but it was doing business development and marketing, which I have a career in. So I took the job. The owners of the company were back east, and they were quite elder pretty elder. And so I was really the person running the company here in Los Angeles, doing everything that's revenue generating. Getting more cases from our attorneys, attending the trade shows, managing the trade shows, booking the trade shows, creating all of our marketing material, producing our online videos, which I'm obviously not very good at, and recruiting our doctors. So literally everything that would grow our group, I was doing. And I did this for about 2 months by myself before the owner of the company came back for a visit. And it was a Friday, and she pulled me into her office in the afternoon and said, close the door. And this person is, by the way, a tiny little Jewish woman. I mean, like 4'11". And you would think that she's harmless, but she is not. I closed the door, I sat down, and this woman put her finger in my face and said, nobody likes you. Across the board, I hear you have a snotty attitude. Now, this hit me like a brick in my chest, and I immediately felt the trauma. Number one, the snotty attitude are words that my mother would say all the time. I don't even like to call her my mother. I refer to her as my birth vessel because that's all she was. Those were some of her favorite words. And the across the board thing was, it gave me that immediate feeling of where your reality is completely shifted, because other people in the office had told me that I was doing a great job. Many of the women had said, we're so happy that you're here, because the founder of the company and the main revenue generator had to retire, and so they relied upon a business development person to keep the business going. So my job was really important, and I was doing it to the best of my ability. And in a moment, everything changed. I was hysterically crying, despite trying not to cry, while this woman sat across from me just emotionless, really emotionless, and just stopped crying. Didn't even offer me a tissue. And then proceeds to take me to a sales appointment where I'm holding back tears the whole time I'm there. And it was horrible. It was a Friday before Halloween. I had just bought a new costume. I had 2 parties to go to, and I canceled everything. And I spent 4 or 5 days in bed literally crying nonstop. I was absolutely sick and completely disordered and just fucked up. And I canceled all those plans, like I said, and from that moment on, I began to have physiological symptoms that I had never had before, and they have continued to this day, so like 6 years later. And those were me waking in the middle of the night, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, with urgency, bowel, urinary, my eyes would water, my nose would run, I would be sweating, hot and cold, acidic stomach. So in and out of the bathroom to handle all this stuff, and by the time that it's time to get up and go to work, I was completely drained, exhausted, and depleted, which ultimately led to pneumonia for a whole month. I was really sick. But besides that, during the duration of me working there for this company for the rest of the year, I was very, very sick. I went to a gastroenterologist, psychiatrists, 2 of them, a general practitioner, and nobody could find anything. All they wanted to do was just prescribe the wrong medications, let's just say that, over and over, or nothing at all. And during this time of being traumatized at work, I was also being traumatized at home. My next door neighbor was just an old crazy lady. She's just crazy. She's just the kind of lady that stays at home all the time and has a bunch of cats, and I love cats. I have 2 of them. They're sitting right here. But she got in trouble a lot with the health department because she would feed crows, and she ended up feeding skunks and raccoons. So we had a menagerie of aggressive, stinky animals right on our property. And so a couple of the people that lived there told the landlord, and he asked her to stop, and she decided to take it out on me. And she did this by utilizing animal control themselves. She called them and said that I was poisoning cats under our house, which there weren't any cats under our house. I had made sure to have the maintenance man check to make sure there was no animals under there before we closed up the crawl spaces so that we could stop this process. They began to harass me, animal control, and in addition to that, she used the police. If you call the police for any reason, they have to respond. So it doesn't matter if it's a loud wind chime call or loud music, which I only had a laptop and a TV. They're going to come. And of course, every time that they would come, I would try to tell them that, she's crazy, but they just always take things like there's two sides to every story, and don't we hate hearing that? Don't we hate that shit? Makes my skin crawl. You two have a disagreement or whatever, and it's just like, no, we don't. She is an abuser. But I digress. During this time, I was being harassed at home. I was traumatized, completely traumatized, and I ended up fleeing California in full flight mode. Looking back, that's what it was. I just felt so trapped, and those of us with trauma understand that that's where trauma lives. Trauma occurs when you're trapped. So as a child, it doesn't even occur to you that you have an option to leave. You feel so trapped. As a soldier, when you're traumatized, you're trapped there too. If you're in an abusive relationship, you're trapped in that marriage. And that's where trauma lives. And so I fled California, and I moved somewhere I thought I could use a small settlement that I was expecting. And I learned my lesson about situations like that too. Always get a lawyer when you have a traffic accident. Just don't ever think that you can do it yourself. Because it took 2 years to settle, and for a fraction. And that fraction is all that got me to California, back to California. So I was in California, went to Texas to try and invest in real estate, failed miserably at that, and while I was there was in absolute hell because I was traumatized, I was sick, and while I was there, my symptoms were horrible. And at one point, my heart was racing so much I could see it through my shirt. I couldn't catch my breath for days. I had this tightening in my throat, which I'm sort of feeling right now. And I wanted to end it. I was absolutely at the end of my rope. I had gone no contact. I had no support. I was in a place I hadn't lived in for 10 years. And I checked myself into the emergency room. And they found that I had complete thyroid storm. I had absolutely no TSH showing. And, thyroid disease and adrenal fatigue and all that stuff is just a wonderful little gift that's left over from trauma. So at least at that point I had an answer, and those people saved my life. And, the doctors that were helping me were like, yeah, having thyroid storm and thyroid disease will absolutely make you feel crazy, and it will make you feel suicidal, depressed, anxious, all of those things. It's very real. So I got a little bit of treatment in Texas, but when I moved back, I sought help from an endocrinologist who didn't treat me, because if it's going up and down, if your thyroid is going up and down, and for me those symptoms always happen in the middle of the night and in the early morning, so by the time I get to the lab and they finally take my blood, it just wasn't ever high enough. And so now, having untreated thyroid disease, I now have the symptoms of hypoglycemia. So I have been dealing with a lot of anger about that. And I'll talk a little bit about my anger in another video. I don't want to get off too much track. I just want to talk about how primed I was for this type of physiological trauma. I had had so much trauma growing up, and looking back, I had a lot of those kinds of CPTSD responses when I was at home. Anytime I would go back to visit for Christmas or whatever, I had this experience of, if I was in bed asleep and my mother opened the door, which she always loved to do, she never would wait for me to wake my own self up. She'd always have to wake me up. So she would open the door, and yeah, that would startle a lot of people, but I had this experience of, like, literally leaping out of bed. Cat! Sorry. My cat is jumping up there, and that wasn't the, that's the response that I would have, sitting straight up in bed, and that's a trauma response, I've learned. And that would always happen a little bit whenever I'd come back, and then it would subside. So I've had these I had, certain kinds of trauma looking back, growing up, but getting away from that and being as far away as I possibly could get without swimming to an island is very healing. So I had kind of gotten to this point where I didn't know I was traumatized. I was just trying to live my life, and then this situation happened with my employer. So I haven't been the same. I'm not the same person as I was 6 years ago. I wasn't much of a big drinker, never really was, but I absolutely cannot drink now. So my social life, if you're not going to go out and drink, there's other things to do, but when you're trying to recreate new social circles, it's difficult. I've also struggled financially. I literally lost everything, and there's a lot of things that have happened, but when you are in a position where you're in need and you don't have anyone to depend on, you get taken advantage of. You have to take the bottom of the barrel options sometimes, and you end up going through a lot more trauma, or at least I have. So I can honestly tell you that this channel has saved my life. If it weren't for this channel, I don't think I'd be here, and I'm not ashamed to say that. It's a very real emotional response to trauma and loss, isolation, and then, to add insult to injury, the physiological symptoms that I now have to deal with every day. And who knows, maybe I would just have thyroid disease anyway. But I don't think that it would be this bad this young in my life, at this point. So I think I kind of just wanted to tell that story to kind of give you an idea of how we are set up for more trauma and how it happens, and that if you're having these symptoms, to really maybe that gives you a little bit of direction. Sorry, my cat is bouncing the camera. But just please be encouraged. Please be encouraged. I don't want to air all my dirty laundry and all my losses. I'll pepper them in small doses so that you're not like, oh my God. But I'm still here. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for every one of you out there sharing your stories and supporting one and all of us supporting each other. I just wouldn't. And I'm no expert, and I don't have, these fantastic gems of whatever. I just have my own experiences, and it's not an egoic thing to share your experience if you're struggling with that because you've been put down and you've had to defend yourself. And just share your story. Don't be afraid to. Even if one person views your video, the act of putting it out there and sharing it is so cathartic, and it's so healing. And so with that, I just say, Happy New Year. I'm going to make a few more videos. I'm going to try to keep them topical so that I don't ramble. I have a tendency to do that. And, I'm also, I treated myself to some supplements that Battle Hymn of the Empath talked about that treat CPTSD. And they're all arriving today and over the next few days, so I'm really excited. I'll keep you posted on how all of that goes. But I'm taking responsibility moving forward. I'm the only one that's driving this train, and I have to be responsible. I've gone no contact, and if I really want to put that in my past, I have to create something new. So you're not alone. It gets better, and we are all here in it together. So I love you. Mwah. Happy New Year.